seriously popular.
Hello and welcome to Apocalypse Now, dispatches from a world on the brink. In this week's episode, we look at Donald Trump's first 100 days in office with none other than a key architect of Trumpism, Steve Bannon.
If you like this episode, we think you'll love this.
Hi, I'm Marjorie Hernandez, and I'm one of the hosts of The Trial of Diddy, a weekly true crime podcast where we sift through every element of this incredible case. This week, we're catching up with Rochelle Keehan, former Special Victims Prosecutor and founder of Collective Liberty, an organization dedicated to the eradication of sex trafficking. It's out now wherever you get your podcasts.
Out now from the Crime Desk, the home of arresting podcasts. Listen to our brand new high-stakes investigative series, Heists, Scams and Lies, unravelling the mystery behind the biggest domestic burglary in British history.
We've covered this incredible story since the day it broke, almost 5 years ago. It takes us from one of London's most exclusive streets to some of the roughest in Central Europe. Where are Tamara Eccleston's stolen diamonds?
Episode 1 is out now, with new episodes every Wednesday. Just search Heists, Scams and Lies wherever you get your podcasts. Don't want to wait? Become a member of the Crime Desk today and unlock the full series straight away. You'll get loads of additional member-only benefits, including ad-free listening across all our award-winning true crime shows, exclusive weekly episodes of The Trial Plus.
Join us on The Trial Plus as we dive deeper into exactly what's going on behind some of the most significant court cases in the world.
Early access to new podcasts launching later this year, like An Appointment with Murder,
a forensic examination of those who kill,
starting with the murderous habits of doctors who kill their patients,
or our harrowing upcoming investigative series, Charlene.
I'm Nicola Thorpe, and I'm in search of the truth of what really happened to Charlene Downs over 20 years ago. Somebody knows something.
Start your 7-day free trial today at thecrimedesk.com, or you can subscribe via Apple Podcasts.
The Crime Desk. Arresting podcasts.
Hello and welcome to Apocalypse Now, dispatches from a world on the brink, the Daily Mail's weekly global news podcast. I'm David Patrikarakos, and I've spent the last 15 years covering foreign affairs and conflict in some of the world's most dangerous places. But even I have to ask, are we now staring into the abyss?
If President Trump had not had the election stolen from him in 2020, I realize you guys don't believe it. The whole reason he came back and ran again was his burning conviction that he had won in 2020. It had been stolen. What we've done in Ukraine and the Middle East since then is far bloodier. There's over 1.5 million people either dead or wounded, and Ukraine looks like Dresden in 1945, and Gaza looks worse. And my overarching problem with Elon is he's a transhumanist. We are hurtling towards a inflection point for all mankind. The Chinese Communist Party is an illegitimate dictatorship, the most brutal dictatorship in mankind's history, in modern history. They're worse than the Bolsheviks, worse than the Nazis. When President Trump leaves the political scene, a lot of you guys are going to wish he would come back, because I think what follows President Trump is going to be much harder and much farther to the right. President Trump is going to be eligible, is going to run again, and will win again. And I will tell you, on the afternoon of January of 2029, he's going to be in the White House signing executive orders.
Time magazine called him the great manipulator. The Washington Post describes his War Room podcast as a far-right meet the press. Back in 2019, Trump was moved to describe him as one of my best pupils, which is, let's face it, something of a double-edged sword. Not that any of these epithets might trouble our guest today. He's a special breed of disruptor. Former Navy lieutenant, Goldman Sachs banker, and Hollywood film producer. One-time head of Breitbart News, White House Chief Strategist, and most recently, federal prisoner. It's the kind of resume that can help build empires, or topple them. Steve Bannon just doesn't care what you might think about any of that. His War Room is the hottest stop in DC's media circuit. Even prominent Dems are lining up to appear on a show broadcast 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, and 2 hours on a Saturday. Like his saviour though, even Steve Bannon needs to rest on a Sunday. Over the next half an hour or so, I'll ask what Steve Bannon makes of his former boss and of the first 100 days of his second term. What MAGA means to him, his remarkable career arc, his obsession with Russia, his hatred of China, and how politics is like war in which controlling the narrative is everything. Joining me now from his HQ in Washington, D.C. is political strategist and War Room host Steve Bannon. Steve, welcome. Let's jump straight in then, Steve. As we approach 100 days of Trump 2, what have you made of them? What's working for you and what isn't? Not just as the host of War Room, but as a working American.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Look, this is a revolution. The Trump project is to actually bring the nation back to the foundational elements of its greatness. And you see President Trump in every different vertical, whether it's reorganizing the world's commercial relationships, a pivot on our geostrategic position, whether it's taking down the administrative state, stopping the wars on the Eurasian landmass. I think in every vertical, it's just been unbelievable. And this could not have happened if President Trump had not had the election stolen from him in 2020. I realize you guys, don't believe it. But if we had gone right into the second term then, it would have been 1/100th of what we are today. That 4 years of President Trump thinking, of preparation, of things like Project 2025, it just added so much to it. Our strategy of flood the zone, this has become so much more powerful than I think and so much more accomplished than we ever believed that I'm just really looking forward to the next 100 days.
You talk about looking forward, enjoying it, I guess. You recently told Business Insider that the key to understanding the War Room and your leadership style was to watch the Gregory Peck World War II movie 12 O'Clock High, in which a commander's zeal for mission leads him to a mental breakdown. This seems an odd end goal, Steve. Why do you say this is like your current work, your Trump project, your MAGA project?
Hang on, that's great. I'm glad you picked that up. Remember, the leader himself had a nervous breakdown, but the mission was accomplished. The whole part about 12 O'Clock High, we make all of our employees watch it. We have the whole War Room posse watch it. It's putting your objective over what's best for you personally. So as part of the War Room posse, part of the MAGA base, really the activist wing of President Trump's movement, it's always been about objective. And I think that's why, over the next couple of days, it's been so rejoicing. People just sitting there saying, look what we accomplished, given the fact that when the election was stolen, he was driven from the White House. Those, and I'm sure you remember, those years of 21 and 22 looked so grim when Fox News and so many people abandoned President Trump, traditional Republicans, to see the comeback, and particularly the intensity that people like Russ Vought and Brooks Rollins and Stephen Miller, Dr. Roberts, everybody put into the effort to have all these policies and then just hammer it through every day in all these different, like 12 different verticals. It's just been amazing. And that's why I think people feel like we're reaching our objectives. We're reaching what we set out to do, which is really to remake America.
It's interesting to hear you talk, not just about Trump, but about those all around him. Because what I find interesting is you've also said Trump's a moderate. The MAGA movement is much further right than Donald Trump. Can you explain how?
If you look at President Trump, he's always trying to balance. Number one, he's trying to balance our coalition that goes all the way from people on the hard right to the tech bros and the Elon Musk of the world and libertarians. So hardcore populist nationalists and also kind of these libertarian tech bros. But also in the country, remember, he's being president for the entire United States. So he's trying to balance things all the time. He is a moderate in our movement. I mean, we have people much farther right on the populist national side. I think even inside the administration now, you see people like Stephen Miller, who's a hardcore nationalist, right? You see like Peter Navarro, who's probably the hardest core economic nationalist, and he balances that with Lutnick and Scott Bessent. So the MAGA movement, and I think the center of gravity of the MAGA movement, and President Trump's our leader, is I think much farther to the right politically than President Trump. I warn people all the time when they're in their Trump deranged syndrome. I said, when President Trump leaves the political scene, a lot of you guys are going to wish he would come back, because I think what follows President Trump is going to be much harder and much farther to the right.
I just want to sort of pick up on this, because in all of your statements about the movement, about what it is you do. The metaphor, it's not even a metaphor actually, of war is ever present. I remember, I think it was David Brooks, the New York Times journalist, spoke to you about reaching over and talking to the other side. And you said, why would I even want to do that?
Well, look at the last 4 years. And I think that this is, President Trump, it was a providential win in 2016. We came from behind. We had a man, we had a plane, we had a message, very few resources, almost no organization. President Trump just took it on his shoulders and won. Then in the White House from the very beginning, fighting the Russia hoax, things we know today were illegal and made up. And then if you look at the years, and this is why I think it was providential, the steal in 2020 in the Biden administration, because we saw how radical, and I think a lot of people in the country saw how radical they were, not just on cultural issues, but on economics, the opening of the border and allowing 10 million illegal aliens here. Now that we know it's going to cost us $170 billion to deport them, I think that awakened everybody, and it was kind of providential. And so this is why I think President Trump, this is a key moment in history, a key pivot moment for this movement and for the country. And I think people look at President Trump and said, hey, his decision to come back in 2021 was a conscious decision. He understood fully what they would try to do against him. He understood that they would try to put him in prison for decades. He understood that they would try to bankrupt him and smear him and maybe even assassinate him. That was never too far from his mind, I think. So that's why this movement only gets stronger. And right now, this 100 days and the culmination of it, of the first 100 days, people couldn't be more stoked.
And you are utterly convinced that election was stolen, the Joe Biden win. You believe the vote was rigged?
I'm not a machine guy. I know a lot of people have talked about the machines. We've been adamant since day one. I'm open to people talking about the machines, and because I don't understand why they're so complicated. I think it was the mail-in ballots. I mean, a core belief of the inner circle of President Trump, and a core belief. He said this a couple of times. One time on stage at Turning Point back in 23. First time I heard him say it. The whole reason he came back and ran again was his burning conviction that he had won in 2020. It had been stolen. I would like to see, and I've been kind of harping on this, a formal investigation by the Justice Department. I think for the good of the country, we need to get all the facts on the table, what happened. I believe it was the mail-in ballots. But yes, a core belief of his inner group and our audience, almost to a person, I think it's almost 100%, believe strongly to the core of their being that the 2020 election was stolen.
This is interesting because it's a very strong narrative. And Steve, you always say media is everything, which is why you say Trump watches TV. He understands, you said, that to get anything done, you have to make the people understand. So this is constantly about narrative warfare. And so people need to forget about the noise and focus on the signal. Can you explain what you mean by this?
I continue to say that to understand Trump, you have to understand this guy named Marshall McLuhan, who was a professor at Washington University in St. Louis. He was the theoretician about mass communications. It was really when radio was at its height, the movies industry and TV was just starting. It was back in the 1950s. And he said, hey, something's happening here in the world with this new thing of mass communications that can touch every person in the world, that's going to change evolutionary biology. And it will be the most important thing ever. In fact, the medium or the message that comes out will actually be more important than what's happening in reality and in fact drive reality. President Trump is a McLuhan-esque figure. He understands more than any person I've ever seen. And I spent years, even as an investment banker, in media at Goldman Sachs and in my own firm. He understands mass media to his core, how to reach an average working class and middle class audience and how to hit them right here in the solar plexus and have a connection. What the mainstream media has always missed about President Trump is this incredible connection he has with his voters. It's beyond political. It's beyond, I don't want to say it's spiritual, but it's a commonality. It's like a brotherhood that they say, this guy's a billionaire, right? He's got, all the riches in the world. He's got all the fancy stuff in the world, yet he cares about me. He speaks to me, and he speaks to me in my concerns, and he speaks to me in a non-political nomenclature. It's the first thing in 2014, after knowing President Trump, not too well, but kind of well for a couple of years, I really started following him in these early cattle calls he would go to in places like Iowa and New Hampshire. He would speak in a non-political nomenclature and basically common sense language, and people would lean into it. That is the fundamental connection between him and his voters. And that expands out as African-American men start to come to his message, the whole UFC, young men under 30, people start to see who this guy really is. So it's one of the most important things. And it's stunning to me that the mainstream media, who's in the mass communications business, actually misses this part all the time. And so it's really President Trump's superpower.
And what about you in all this, Steve? Time magazine famously, in 2017, I think it was, ran with the headline, "The Great Manipulator. Is Steve Bannon the second most powerful man in the world?" What a lovely thing to read about yourself, Steve. But now you say you don't want to roll in the White House because, and I quote, "it will be giving up power." This is really interesting. Please explain to me what you mean by that.
Well, President Trump and the Trump movement need platforms. As you know, coming from one of the most powerful platforms in the world and a platform that a tremendous amount of our audience accesses every day. Fox News is really what I call neoliberal neocon. They're very traditional Republican. I mean, the Murdochs kind of tolerate Trump because he gets to power and they kind of rah-rah, but they don't really believe any of the core beliefs. Today, in fact, I played a clip on the show, Karl Rove sitting there on Fox News just berating Trump for everything. His polls are terrible. His policies are terrible. We also, during the show, talked about the Wall Street Journal had an op-ed from Jerry Baker, who's the former editor-in-chief, a guy I'd really admire, but he was ripping on Trump for the Russian deal, for the Russian rapprochement and for the Ukraine deal. So they're very traditional neoliberal neocon, not populist nationalists. President Trump needs those platforms. And I realized War Room, when I started, it was about impeachment, the first impeachment. Nobody was talking about it. We were about a month ahead of the rest of the media, supporting President Trump every day, getting his people up there, and actually being a kind of an action center, because we're not really a traditional entertainment show or a news show. We're really an action center to give information to the tip of the spear of the Trump movement and to make sure they're engaged and out in the field and doing their activities to support President Trump. And so right now in narrative warfare, you need those kind of little armies, and that's what we are. And it's much more powerful than I was in the White House, and I would never give it up. That President Trump needs a couple of 3 war rooms to make sure that they got his flank every day.
War room, I understand now, is actually not really metaphorical. You see yourselves as foot soldiers for the Trump project.
100%. We actually are a war room. 2 things we started in 2021 after President Trump went to Mar-a-Lago. One is there's a guy named Dan Schultz that had this thing called the precinct strategy. One of the things you have to do when you have a catastrophic, in that case, a steal, but the bottom line was Trump was not in the White House, was going to go back to Mar-a-Lago, is you have to give people something to rally around. And this was the precinct strategy. You say, hey, look, don't worry about Biden. Don't worry about, let's just get back to the basics. Let's get back to the precincts. Do something. Put your channel changer down. Use your human agency. What you can do. Get involved, get engaged, take over the precinct, take over the local Republican Party, take over your local town council. And we literally had hundreds of thousands of people that watch the show do that. This is why we've taken over virtually every state party in the country with MAGA loyalists, with President Trump loyalists. And so we're an information show for those every day. The other part was to actually be a platform ideas, because we're a huge believer that ideas have consequences. And so we became a platform for those think tanks like America First Parties Institute of Brooks Rollins and Stephen Miller's America First Law, particularly Project 2025, which we highlighted very early on. Russ Vogt and the team over at Center for Renewing America, the guys at the Conservative Foundation Institute, Policy Institute. So what we did is a platform for the people putting together the think tanks that became essentially what's called Project 2025, but were all the ideas you see in flooding the zone. The one thing in the first term, we came from behind to win. So we had no bench. We had no time for transition. We could never fill, of the 4,000 billets you have, jobs you have to fill to take over the government, whether you're Obama's administration, Bush, or Trump, we never filled. I think two-thirds of them was the most we ever filled. Now, after 4 years of working together and building up cadres, you actually had teams ready to go day one, and you had policies. That's why this 100 days has been so overwhelming to the media, been so overwhelming to our opposition, is that it's 4 years of planning. We could have never done this if President Trump had ended up not having the election stolen from him in 2020. The second term would have just been a kind of a grind like the Germans and the Russians in World War II have been trench warfare. Here, it was open field running and just powering every day. And that came from the 4 years of doing this and telling people, hey, it's on you. It's not on Trump. Trump's got the weight of the world on his shoulders. You got to step up. You have to step up. And so our audience, say they're the hoplites. They're the fixed bayonet crowd. They're the tip of the spear, and they love it, and they're proud of it. And it's given people, actually, later in life, people 40 years old and older, which is a huge amount of our audience, actually another whole kind of a second wind in their life, meeting new people, getting engaged, and feeling a sense of accomplishment. Hell, the comeback from 2021 to victory on November 5th, 2024, it was ecstasy. People just couldn't believe it. All that hard work, and particularly the dark years leading up to that.
When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with former White House Chief Strategist Steve Bannon. Stay with us.
If you like this episode, we think you'll love this.
Hi, I'm Marjorie Hernandez, and I'm one of the hosts of The Trial of Diddy, a weekly true crime podcast where we sift through every element of this incredible case. This week, we're catching up with Rochelle Keehan, former Special Victims Prosecutor and founder of Collective Liberty, an organization dedicated to the eradication of sex trafficking. It's out now wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Apocalypse Now, dispatches from a world on the brink. Steve Bannon is still with us. You talk about Trump's inner circle. Well, that is a varied circle, and I think it's fair to say that you're probably keener on some people within that circle than others. Elon Musk has called you a great talker, but not a great doer, while you've gone on record as saying Elon was always evil. So come on, Steve, what is your problem with Elon Musk?
My problem with Elon Musk is not really around his backing of our play in the election, which I think was very smart. His engineering mind saw it was going to be a grassroots campaign. He put his money where his mouth was. Thought that was very smart. And Doge as a concept and some of the activity I thought was very, very smart. My problem with Elon is with all these guys, like Amazon came out today. Amazon's come out and tried to challenge President Trump. We've got Google in federal court to break him up. We got Facebook in federal court to break him up. Remember, we are anti-oligarch. And because we don't trust the oligarchs are all progressives, including Elon Musk. They were all progressive. They're all progressive in their outlook. They've just come to President Trump because he's a winner, but you can't help Bezos guys from turning on him. My problem with Elon Musk is, number one, they're techno-feudalist. These guys are not populist nationalists. They're globalist, but even more importantly, they're techno-feudalist. The progressive Democrats and Democratic Party and Wall Street created these oligarchs of these 5 or 6 different verticals in Silicon Valley and let them become an apartheid state, okay? That was all driven by progressive politics. Now we have to sort it out. The way you sort it out is break them up. And my overarching problem with Elon is he's a transhumanist. We are hurtling towards, in the next couple of years, a inflection point for all mankind. When we get to this mark called the singularity, it will be driven by biotechnology, quantum computing, chip design, but most importantly, artificial intelligence. And Elon's one of the leading transhumanists with his Neuralink, the chip that he wants to put in your brain. This is very dangerous what we're doing. There's more regulation right now. If you're a young Korean girl and want to start a nail salon in Washington, D.C., you have to go through 10 times more regulations to open your nail salon than you do if you're dealing with the most dangerous aspects of artificial intelligence. This is going to become a huge political issue. If not in 26 and 28, this will be one of the most important political issues in the next presidential election. I'm adamantly opposed to the techno-feudalists and adamantly opposed to these radical transhumanists.
Do you support what he's trying to do with Doge? And is he doing it?
I was one of the architects of deconstructing the administrative state, which we have to do to get control of our government back, because they had created over 40 or 50 years, really a fourth branch of government that was impervious to elections. And I don't care if that election is AOC or Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump. There was a permanent bureaucracy, the fourth branch of government, this administrative state that was this is what kept us in these continual wars. This is what keeps all this debt being raised. It's got to be broken up. You have have to go at it, and you have to hit it with a blunt force instrument. Like President Trump is a blunt force instrument on the political class. You need also a blunt force instrument on the administrative state. Elon's direction on this, I thought, was brilliant, and to find the waste and fraud is smart. But when you go after it, you got to find it, right? Or come back and tell people that's not part of it, because here's the problem. We have a political class that are cowards. They're going to continue to splend us into oblivion because they really report to their donors. They don't report to the people. So this is why we're going to have $6.5 or $7 trillion of spending with only about $4.5 or $5 trillion of tax revenue or tariffs, whatever. $2 to $2.5 trillion every year we have to finance. It's not just burying future generations. It's burying working class and middle class people right now. This is one of the reasons it's very hard to get inflation out of the system, because at $37 trillion in debt, where you're adding about $1 trillion every 100 days to that debt, you have to refinance that all the time. And so this is the embedded. The political class doesn't want to be courageous and make cuts, logical cuts to defense and social programs. So what they're looking for is a fairy godmother to kind of come in and say, oh, it's not programmatically, it's fraud. It's fraudsters. And my point is, there's some fraud out there. We should find it. But it's not $1 trillion, as he's come back and said. At first it was $2 trillion, then $1 trillion. Now it's $150 billion. I just want it to be what it is, and we should have a full accounting of that. In that effort, I think Elon actually was trying to do good. Now, it got a little off track. It got a little too emotional. Maybe it was too dramatic. I think he's learned a lot of lessons, but that still needs to be done. We still need to wring all the fraud out of the system. The only thing I'm asking for is let's have a full accounting of exactly what was found and who the fraudsters are. If people are defrauding the Social Security, which we haven't been shown yet, if they're defrauding the Treasury Department, if they're defrauding things, they should be indicted and investigated and put in jail, and the money should be clawed back. So this is important. Also, we have to, and I think this is very important for President Trump and his administration, I think we have to give an audit to the American people to make sure that in their search and Doge doing these things, that no data or data sets, and particularly private information of American citizens, nothing seeped outside the system that's not totally controlled by the Trump administration and the federal government. The American people willingly give over their private information to the government, and this is kind of sacrosanct, and I think we have to let the American people know, hey, this thing went on to find fraud, but all the information, all the data sets, nothing left. The control of the federal government and the Trump administration has a total control of it.
Moving outwards now, Trump has repeatedly professed admiration for Xi Jinping as a strong leader. Now, you once lived in Shanghai, I think, but you now perceive China as America's mortal enemy. Tell me why.
Well, China's not. The Chinese people, Lao Beijing, I think, have a real strong bond with the American people. The Chinese Communist Party is an illegitimate dictatorship, the most brutal dictatorship in mankind's history, in modern history. They're worse than the Bolsheviks, worse than the Nazis. I mean, the level of slaughter of Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping and others is monumental. Xi's a brutal dictator. Now, President Trump, he has a complicated process. He wants to stop the economic war that the Chinese Communist Party has been at the United States now for 10, 15, 20 years. And remember, you're doing this against an organization that ever since the American elite, our sociopathic overlords on Wall Street, the corporatists in the global corporations, and the apartheid state of Silicon Valley helped to get them into the World Trade Organization and most favored nation status in the 90s. Then President Obama's, quite frankly, brilliant cyber deal in 2015, which they never lived up to, after never living up to WTO or most favored nation. Then the Hong Kong situation where they totally ripped up a deal. Then President Trump, for 2 years in his first administration, 2 years, negotiates an incredible deal that couples both economies. And President Trump met Xi halfway. They just tear it up and walk away. Then the skinny deal in 2020, which they haven't met any requirements on. President Trump is trying to balance to make sure that we don't slide into a kinetic war with the Chinese Communist Party, either in the South China Sea or around the Straits of Taiwan. And so I think President Trump's doing what a world leader and the leader of the free world and the President of the United States and our Commander-in-Chief should do, is to show the guys respect and try to make sure that we can get some sort of accommodation. Now, myself, because I'm the only civilian that's fully sanctioned by the Chinese Communist Party, is one of the leaders of the anti-CCP movement around the world, and particularly in the United States. I have no problem calling these guys out as the thugs and criminals they are. And I think the American people are starting to see that more clearly every day. It's not China. It's not the Chinese people. Lao Beijing, which is a term of endearment for old 100 names, the basic common man and woman in China, are spectacular people, fantastic people, and I think have a very close bond to the citizens of the United States.
On that note, you've actually repeatedly said that one of your obsessions is to bring the US and Russia together. Indeed, you've met with Putin advisor Alexander Dugin to convince him that Russia and America are partners in the same Judeo-Christian civilization against China. Why are you so obsessed with this, Steve? And why do you and Donald Trump treat Russia like a superpower when it really is not?
Number one, I think that if you want to get out of continual wars in the Eurasian landmass, the 20th century was replete with wars that killed, I don't know, a couple of 100 million people. If you add in the starvation and the disease, a couple of 100 million people. I mean, brother, people are going to look back in the 20th century as like a dark age of the barbarity of that century. It was all about control of the Eurasian landmass. In fact, you go back to the 19th century about Napoleon and Nelson and the fight over that. It's always been this fight kind of by this theoretician, the Scottish geographer called Mackinder, that he who controls the heartland of the world island can control the world. And so we've had these bloody wars over that for over 100 years, killing hundreds of millions of people. We have an opportunity right now to do reverse what Nixon and Kissinger did in the early 1970s. And when Nixon and Kissinger said, hey, to break this logjam of the Cold War and to make sure that we take this nuclear insanity away, what we have to do is break up the communist bloc. And what we'll do is we'll negotiate with the Chinese and do it that way because the Chinese and the Russians are not that close. All we're trying to do that in reverse, and this actually makes more sense. For the simple reason is that the Russian people, who are our great allies in World War II, not the Bolsheviks, not Stalin, not the Soviets, these guys are another group of thugs, but the Russian people who, I don't know, sacrificed 40, 50 million dead and wounded and killed in disease in the Second World War, who are our real allies, work out some sort of rapprochement with them, and then we can put our guns down in Ukraine. We can then stop this madness in Western Europe where the defenses had to be so big because of a potential Russian invasion. Remember, I spent 4 years at sea. Our mission on our ship was hunting Soviet submarines. It was back at the height of the Cold War. I then went to the Pentagon for 4 years and starting on the first day of Reagan's administration. Our entire maniacal focus was Western Europe, was a Russian, the Red Army advanced through the North German plain, through Poland, into Germany, tactical nuclear weapons, deep strikes. Those days are over. We have to lay down the guns of the 20th century. I think that's what President Trump is saying. If we do that in that arc of instability, that really goes from Belarus and Ukraine all the way through the Balkans and Turkey into the Middle East, all the way through Syria to Persia, the Red Sea and the North Arabian Sea, Persian Gulf, that arc of instability. And if you add in Kashmir, which a mere spark, this is a flashpoint, World War III, which we're already in, the kinetic part of this has started. This is much bloodier than 1939 and the invasion of Poland to 1941, the German invasion of Russia, which people think of the first couple of years of World War II, the official start. What we've done in Ukraine and the Middle East since then is far bloodier. There's over 1.5 million people either dead or wounded, and Ukraine looks like Dresden in 1945, and Gaza looks worse. We are in the kinetic part of this, and if we don't watch ourselves, this thing's going to metastasize either in a Kashmir or somewhere in the southern Arabian Peninsula, or a carrier getting shot up in the Red Sea. We are 2 minutes to midnight to have a greater conflagration. And this is what I think President Trump's trying to say. Hey, if I can reach some kind of rapprochement with a part of the Judeo-Christian West, which is Russia, then we can kind of lay down our arms and calm this thing down. And I'm telling you, if Trump's not successful in this, in China, in the KGB mafia in Moscow, working with the Beijing criminal element, continue to work with the mullahs in Persia, in Tehran. You add in North Korea, you add in what's happening in Pakistan right now against India. People better understand, as barbaric as the Second World was, the Third World War will be of such a level of brutality with weapons, not just nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, biological weapons, that people can't even comprehend.
We've seen already that Trump is trying to take China on. Now it's through tariffs. We've already seen him soften his stance slightly in this trade war. Can he take China on in a tariff war?
It's not can he take China on, he must take China on. Here's the reason, is that Wall Street, the global corporatists in Silicon Valley gutted for 20 or 25 years, 30 years, the heartland of the United States, 5 million high-paying, value-added jobs, I think 90,000, 100,000 factories, all shifted, all closed down in the United States and shifted to China. Our manufacturing base, the real manufacturing base of the United States of America went there. And what came in? The fentanyl, the second opium war, the chemical warfare that the Chinese Communist Party is running on us. What the tariffs stand for is President Trump's concept of reorganizing global commercial activities, saying, hey, look, we're a premium market. We're the number one consumer market in the world. So one or two things are going to happen. You're either going to pay a higher fee to get here. It's like buying a skybox for a sporting event or getting a front row seat in a concert. You're going to pay a premium, or you can shift your manufacturing here. Now with China, since we have a $18 trillion trade deficit with China alone, and I think it increases by $500 or $600 billion a year, and they've stolen $600 billion a year of intellectual property, either stolen or forced American companies to give them. We have an overall $25 trillion trade deficit. We have something like a $30 trillion deficit as far as intellectual property has been stolen. You have to confront that, and he's confronting it through tariff and non-tariff barriers. Right now, people should understand, we have a total embargo, virtually, of Chinese goods coming into the United States. I think Secretary of Treasury Bannon is doing a very good job of stacking up like planes over LaGuardia on a Friday night, deals with, particularly with these East Asian manufacturing powerhouses, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam, the Philippines, and eventually India, to get some sort of essentially trading block that has dropped their non-tariff barriers. We work together, manufacturing jobs are part of it coming back, and then collectively we take on China. People should know this is very complicated, very tough, and President Trump, just his negotiating style, he's gonna pivot on you. There's gonna be plot twist, okay, in this movie. Don't think he's not a linear thinker, and this is not gonna be a linear process.
You have said Trump will run again and win again in 2028. Is this mere sloganeering designed to stop Trump seeming like a second-term lame duck? What about the Constitution? Is this possible, Steve?
It's definitely possible. There's 4 or 5 ways that we're working as alternatives. Look, when I first got serious about following President Trump in 2014 and saw on these things called cattle calls when he was up in New Hampshire and other places, I saw that people were leaning into what he had to say. I was running Breitbart at the time. I told guys like Dave Bossie, I said, this guy's going to win the Republican nomination. He's going to be the next president. People thought I was crazy. He was polling at 0 at the time. In 2021, when he's forced out of the White House in the January, February, March, I mean, the polling was horrific as the media dumped on him. The Republican Party dumped on him. Both times I said on the first day, on the afternoon of the 20th of January, we got back to Mar-a-Lago, hey, if you want to do this, you're going to come back, be the Republican nominee, win the presidency again. So we've seen, the MAGA movement has seen longer shots than this. Yes, President Trump is going to be eligible, is going to run again, and will win again. And I will tell you, on the afternoon of 20 January of 2029, he's going to be in the White House signing executive orders.
Thank you to Steve Bannon, former White House Chief Strategist and host of The War Room, and to you for listening. Join me, David Patrikarakos, next time as we continue to bring you dispatches from a world on the brink. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram at Apocalypse Now Pod, and you can get in touch via email at apocalypsenowpod@dailymail.com. We'll see you again next week.
If you like this episode, we think you'll love this.
Hi, I'm Marjorie Hernandez, and I'm one of the hosts of The Trial of Diddy, a weekly true crime podcast where we sift through every element of this incredible case. This week, we're catching up with Rochelle Keehan, former Special Victims Prosecutor and founder of Collective Liberty, an organization dedicated to the eradication of sex trafficking. It's out now wherever you get your podcasts.